practicality and how you can actually implement some of these ideas into your classes or your context or your situation that you find yourself in. So with that, we'll get started. And like I said, just feel free to type away in the chat if you have any questions along the way. So the focus of today is just talking about a concept of many concepts and ways of knowing about Indigenous pedagogies, teaching and learning. But one foundation that all of these things kind of can stem from is sharing circles, or just circle work, sitting in circle together and sharing ideas and concepts and learning that way. So that's the focus of the presentation, but within that you'll see there's many different ways of knowing and different cultural understandings and contexts that you can draw from and learn about. So this is a lot of the concepts are taken from Circle Works, Transforming Eurocentric Consciousness, which is a text from 1998, believe it or not, from Fire Jean Graveline. She's an Indigenous person, Métis from the Plains, I believe, and she talks a lot about circle work and how you can use circle frameworks to understand how to decolonize and how to promote Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and then also think about our own positionality, our own constructs of culture, of race, of identity, and all those things. She really takes on a lot in this book, and it's a really pivotal work, and it's really informed my practice as an educator. A lot of these concepts too I've experienced culturally as an Indigenous person, as a Mohawk woman, but it's nice to also have the literature to support and some really higher level thoughts around them too. So I would really recommend that book, and I have a picture of it at the end of the slideshow to show you as well, so that you can know what it looks like and maybe pick up a copy if it's still in print. I hope that it is. So with that, you can't see these circles very well probably, but I'll go through each little rectangle in the circle is a concept that we'll be speaking about. So the first one that comes up or in the circle is respect. So in many Indigenous contexts, it's rooted in it's rooted in a sense of oneness or equality. So a great respect for all living things, a sense that all living things are equal. So our status or our state in life is not something that must be earned or obtained. It's something that we're innately born with. We're all considered sacred. We're all special, and we're all unique in our individual gifts that we have, but collectively we can draw upon those things as our strength and as our way of connecting with each other. So as Haudenosaunee peoples, my peoples, we're taught to give thanks and show gratitude for all forms of life and aspects of creation, because we rely upon all of those things for our survival. So we have to maintain humility, be humble and grateful because of our own vulnerability without the rest of creation and the gifts that Mother Earth provides us with. So all of those things are constantly working in ways that we may not even fully understand, but they support our life here on Earth, and they're gifts that we were given originally by a Creator. So another important feature of culture, but also an important part of sharing circles or teaching and learning, is balance. And this concept of balance it can mean many different things in different Indigenous contexts. In the Haudenosaunee worldview and cultural context, balance can often include balancing aspects of self, so emotional, spiritual, physical, and mental ways of knowing, doing, feeling, believing, understanding, and relating. Some groups, mainly Anishinaabe and other groups, will conceptualize that with a medicine wheel. Haudenosaunee peoples don't usually use the wheel structure, but we do talk about those four directions and the four realms of self. And it's not generally in a circle framework, but you can see the circle in our dances. In ceremony, a lot of things are done in circle. Longhouse is obviously rectangle, so sometimes the circle is more of an oval when you're in a longhouse. But also the longhouse structure is the different clans are set up in the longhouse and they're facing each other. So really the aspect is still the same. It's almost like a circle feel because everyone's facing inward, everyone's facing each other, and there's that support. So it can also mean relational balance or universal and cosmic balance. So what that kind of means in a nutshell is like the sun and the moon balance each other out, just as other aspects of creation work to balance and sustain our lives here. And then various aspects of creation work together in harmony to provide for us. So in my culture, there's a lot of talk about balance between dark and light, and the sun represents the light, the moon represents the dark, and then that's foundational in our creation story. But also there's two twins in our creation story, and they have very different perspectives. One is more of a good twin, and more is considered like almost like an evil twin, but not really. It's just it's on a spectrum. It's a scale. So it's meant to illustrate that there needs to be those two perspectives, the day and the night, or the good and the bad, to balance out our lives here on Earth and make our lives whole and holistic. So that's a concept that finds its way into our teaching and learning practices too. It's that there's struggle, but there's resilience, and there's always that balance and that exchange that happens when we're trying to strengthen ourselves in all of those four realms. So interconnectedness is another one. So all things are dependent upon each other. We can thrive as people, community, nations when there's a web or interconnectedness amongst people, communities, and nations, but also amongst people and nature or natural elements of creation. So there's a sense that we're all related, we're all connected, and everything has a unique spirit. And to always approach things in a good way, because when you're engaging with things outside of yourself, you're always thinking about yourself in relation to those things, and what that relationship stands for and what that means. So then that leads me into the next topic, which is self in relation. So this is just a very important link between individual responsibility and wellness, and then the well-being and strength of communities and nations. So there's an emphasis in Haudenosaunee cultures, and I know in other cultures too, Anishinaabe often talk about this too, on getting to know yourself, getting to know your community, and constantly working towards bettering yourself so that you can be a strong, balanced contributor to your family, communities, and nations. So that's just a foundational thing that's kind of woven into the culture, but also comes out in the way that we relate to others, and the way that we teach and learn and understand the world around us. So you can see that like self and relation is so important for you to help your students develop, and that can be done in a circle process. And then the next one is learning by doing. So learning by doing can mean learning on the land, learning from elders or older members of the community with cultural knowledge and life experiences to share. Helping to build, create, or contribute to community life are ways that you can learn by doing. And it also means that a lot of responsibility is placed upon the learner to take up the tasks of learning about their culture, ways of knowing, cultural practices, but also there's a lot of support in this model too, because elders or knowledge keepers will model the behavior that they are hoping that the youth will take up, and then they also provide a lot of guidance and a lot of leadership in that way too. So they guide them along the path. They don't really tell them the right or wrong approach to things, and they don't always give a direct answer either. If you go to an elder for guidance, you'll get a long story, and you might not ever know the moral of it until like years down the road, days down the road. There's no real concept of time or space, because it's up to the individual of when they pick up that lesson and when they're ready to receive it, kind of thing. So learning is constant in that way, and to learn we must continually listen, reflect, learn, share, and then repeat, and do that continuously in that cycle, and that circle or circle, which is just a metaphor for our lives here, basically. And then observation is another key piece, because observation happens in the circle process. It happens communally, it happens ceremonially, and there's a lot of observation that takes place. Learners can observe their teachers, which can be human or non-human forms from creation. So land and aspects of creation like plant life, animal life can be teachers too. They can teach us a lot about ourselves and about each other and about our connection. And then teachers, human teachers, can observe the learners to see where they might need further guidance or strength in certain areas. So there's always that constant guided approach to the learning and it's a relationship that's lifelong and needs to be developed throughout your lifetime too. So this is proximal energy. So that's kind of a term that I came up with. It's very like scientific sounding, but that's the only way I could think to explain it in English. So in circle and in life, we can feel and learn from our own energy and the energies of other aspects of creation. So it's a good practice to become aware of the energy that you bring to a space. And it's also a skill to learn to read the energies of others. And that can be the energies of people, that can be the energies of animals, plant life, anything that you're relating to. There's an energy flow that happens or an exchange that happens in spaces and in connection. So you can allow that energy to guide you or direct you, or you can train yourself to be good at recognizing when an energy is maybe a bad energy and you need to distance yourself from that. Or if you have a bad energy, you know that you shouldn't be taking on a task where it's important that you have good energy, which I think is pretty much everything you do. I try to be in a good headspace, a good heart space, just a good mindset when I'm doing things and sharing things. And there's different ways that you can ground yourself and learn those things. And for me, it's a lot of it is using grounding techniques that I've picked up along the way, relying on traditional medicines, sacred medicines for grounding, like smudging with you could smudge with sage or sweetgrass is a good one for adding positivity when you're not feeling particularly positive that day, or a space or a circle needs that support. Cedar is another one that you can burn as well. And then tobacco is a good one for offering good words and good thoughts to creation or to Creator himself. So the next one is time and space, and I kind of alluded to this a little bit in the previous ones, but time and space are very different in Indigenous worldviews and contexts. So individuals will learn, teach, and share at various stages throughout their lives and in different ways. So an arbitrary timestamp can't be placed on that. Lessons and teachings will only be presented and received when that person's ready or meant to accept them. If they learn something, it might take a long time for it to resonate with them. And so they might have to sit with it or file it away until it becomes relevant to their own context and understanding. I've had many times when elders have told me a lesson or taught me something, and at the time I was like, I don't even see how that's relevant. Like, I don't understand what that's meant to teach me. But then sometimes it's literally taken years, a couple years later, that teaching will come back into my head and I'll remember what they said and I'll be able to apply it to my life because I've reached a stage of growth or an awareness and an ability to accept that and know how to apply it. And then often I like to connect back to that elder or teacher and thank them for that lesson and say, I got it now, I received that, I know how to implement that now. And it gives them a good sense of connection. There's still that connection. You're still building that relationship with them. You're letting them know that you heard what they said and you took it in. And even though it took a while, it came to you when it needed to come to you. So reciprocity is another aspect that you can work on in circle. So there's a lot of emphasis on reciprocal learning, sharing in many Indigenous cultures. And in circle work, we see that in action. So all participants will engage in a learning and sharing process, and it's often based on equality, respect, sharing, and reciprocity or exchange. So all are given a voice. All learners are also considered teachers. There's a lot of sharing and co-teaching and co-learning that happens. There's no authoritarian approach like you see in many westernized institutions where there's a podium and the prof goes up to the front and lectures for an hour. It's very much, there's no disconnect. Everyone's in the same space, everyone's equal, and everyone has something to contribute in some way. So that's one of the differences. Storytelling is huge as well, and storytelling, I feel, naturally flows through our cultures, but also naturally flows through these circular spaces if we allow it to. So storytelling is extremely important because our ancestors have taught us that those who possess knowledge or take up the task of learning about the world around them, cultural experiences and understandings have that responsibility to pass it on. So a lot of times in Mohawk culture and Haudenosaunee culture, storytellers and people that have the gift of words and being able to express those and share those are the ones that are tasked with carrying forward the important stories, the ceremonies, conducting the ceremonies, teaching and leading in Longhouse and in community. So that's a huge responsibility, but if you're gifted with that, it's something that you shouldn't shy away from. And even if you try to shy away from it, like I often have as a teacher, I didn't accept my role as a teacher right away. I thought, like, I don't know if I'm cut out for that, but more and more I was being led to that, and people were expecting that of me. So I realized, like, my name, Govona Howie, she carries the words, it's my name for a reason. That's my responsibility and my purpose. So people often rely on me for my words, and I can't just ignore that, because that is my responsibility, and I need to carry those words forward. Resistance is another one. So this is the final one, I believe, that is important to talk about, because this approach to pedagogy and life is an act of resistance. So for us to continue our traditional ways and function in this circular realm when everything else is seemingly so linear is an act of resistance. It shows that we are revitalizing, we're reimagining our traditional ways of knowing, being, and living in a world, and we're bringing them into a modern context. I think there's a sense sometimes stereotypically that Indigenous peoples are stuck in the past and that they're not able to move forward and carry on those traditions in the same way. I would argue it doesn't have to be the same way. It doesn't have to be the same approach that our ancestors took. What the important part is that we are carrying forward those thoughts and those good thoughts and intentions behind our methodologies, and using them in spaces to disrupt and decolonize and reconcile, and let others know that these ways are valuable, and that there's a lot of strength to be had for not just Indigenous peoples in these ways of knowing, but for everyone. These approaches are good for all learners. And it gives us a sense of strength as peoples to realize that we have so much knowledge within our own cultural context and understandings that we can bring forward and apply in different contexts. So there's this concept too of an elder talked about this, and I can't remember his name offhand, but I think he was from Alberta, out in Alberta. It might have been a Cree elder. Talked about two-eyed seeing. So Indigenous peoples being able to adapt and see things through the Western lens, but also our Indigenous lens, and to keep those two things in mind, and consider it an approach where it's like both and, or either or like just keep in mind that you can walk in those two worlds quite easily and shift back and forth as needed, and that'll only strengthen our futures and our abilities to carry on as peoples. Okay, so it looks like we don't have any questions yet in the chat, and that's a lot of information to take in. So feel free to kind of take a few minutes to consider things. And then we can address some of these bigger questions, and I can take on like any questions you have about the approach itself, the how of it. This is kind of the why of it and the what, and then I wanted us to work on together the how of it. Oh, Mi'kmaq Elder Albert Marshall. Thank you, Robin. Get my elders confused with all these articles, but I appreciate that. Okay, so Dan, when we're talking about learning by doing and perhaps integrating intergenerational dialogues into our classes, is it appropriate to use elder to describe someone who is an older community member in, say, the queer community, or should this word be exclusively reserved for Indigenous knowledge keepers? I think, yeah, Dan, I think definitely it should be reserved for Indigenous knowledge keepers, just because it has certain connotations around it, and there's even within Indigenous communities, there's a bit of a struggle with that word, because elders can be younger people too. So they can be, if you've reached a level where your understanding and your knowledge base is like at the level of elderhood, but you're only like 40, then people don't always accept that label. And also that's a label that, or an honor actually, that's bestowed upon you by others. So if someone goes around proclaiming that they're an elder, I would say don't necessarily trust them or believe them. But if they've been revered or respected and they are introduced as an elder, then that probably means that they are, because with that humility is like, you wouldn't want to just take on the title of elder if it wasn't bestowed upon you, if you weren't felt by your community to be a leader in that way. So I'd be hesitant about using the word elder in other contexts as well, because there's so much sensitivity around it, even within our own communities and contexts, that it could quickly spiral out of control and further confuse the term, if that makes sense. Yeah, so it's not just a description for senior. It's more to do with your level of understanding and knowledge base than it is your age. Good. I'm glad that that was a question that others had as well. Thanks, Anne-Marie. And that's one that I find confusing too. And that's just the way that I had it explained to me, was that you shouldn't automatically trust someone that proclaims themselves to be an elder, because it might not be, they might not be saying it in a good way. So it's important to check that, and really, you can only know that truly if you get to know them, obviously. But it's just a word of caution. Okay, so the main question that I was hoping to pose or talk about is like, what types of learning and teaching can emerge in circle work? So I can talk a little bit about my experience of what I see emerge when I do this approach. So what I see emerge is students being confident and in their own voice. There's a lot of exchange that happens, and there's also a lot of silence at first because students are hesitant to share in the circle. But I found even the most silent students will be taking things in, and they'll be receiving those messages as I talked about, and they may not apply them right away, and they might not vocalize that in the space and time that you're allowing for the circle, but it'll come out in different ways. So sometimes it'll come out in their reflective practice. If you have assignments that lend themselves to being able to reflect, then it means that they can share in that space and time if they've had time away from the circle to think about it and come back and talk about what they've learned. Okay, so we have a question. What does the term circle work mean? So I'm using it as a term to describe the process of sitting in a physical circle format. So you could have chairs around that are facing inward and have students and yourself as the instructor situated in a circle physically. And I've done different variations, standing, on chairs, right on the ground, sitting. But having that process of being able to look around and see every single person in the space creates a very different atmosphere than desks in rows or desks in groups. And it allows a comfort and a space where you can create a really strong sense of community, of trust, of exchange. And it doesn't take much time at all to actually build that trust in a circle if you're careful about how you do that. And we can talk about the how a little bit more too. I can give some tips of what ways have worked well for me in different contexts. So, and then I said also there's a higher level of understanding about circle is like the symbolism or the metaphor of circle is a metaphor for life. So teaching and learning basically is life. That's what we do from the moment we're put on earth here until we pass, is we teach and we learn continuously. We're doing it in every moment. Whether we know it or not. And to be able to develop ourselves as people, it's good to be able to reflect on that. Like, what does it mean when I teach? What does it mean when I learn? How do I do that? In which ways am I comfortable doing that? Which ways could I try that are maybe uncomfortable but might help me grow? So I think it's good to be reflective about our practice as teachers and learners and as people, to think about how we're living our lives and how we're going about our business here on earth. So hopefully that explains it. Okay, good. I think it does. And then Anastasia, thank you. So do you have advice strategies for drawing in students that are resisting or dominating the invitation to join in a circle or conversation? Yes. So I will, when we do the follow-up email to you with the PowerPoint that I'm presenting, I'll also include some ground rules and guiding principles that I've developed. And that's like a strategy of classroom management. So really, you need to be clear about what you're asking the students to do in the circle. And I've outlined like an approach to that. So like only one person at a time can speak. And sometimes you can pass around an object. I usually have, like, this is my talking feather that I use. I send this around the circle, and only the person that has this can speak. And there's no cross-talking allowed. As the facilitator, you can set a rule where, like, you're allowed to respond to the person talking, or you're allowed to address things that come up. But as often as I can, I try to remain silent and then address it at the end, or if it needs addressing, or address that person individually if I need to. But you can set rules like that so that it's about turn taking and going around the circle and having each person has a moment to share, or however long. You can set time limits. You can be flexible. You can lead with a guiding question. So often I like to start with this icebreaker type questions so that students get used to that feel of the circle. So often I'll say, okay, what's your name, your program, and 2 things about you that you want to share with the group. Or and then the next circle might be opening up with 1 round of what are you grateful for today, or what did you do over the weekend, one exciting thing that you can share. Obviously you don't want them to share their whole life, but just one thing that they can share about their weekend. So that's a good way to build community initially, and then it makes it easier when you want to tackle larger problems or issues with the content of your course. And then I think too, okay, perfect. So that does answer it. I think too, though, it's you have to be careful with when I find sometimes when my students get more comfortable in circle, then the cross talking across the circle happens more. So just be careful and cognizant of that, and then just remind them of those rules again. Okay, remember it's only the person with the feather that gets to speak, or please remain silent while someone else is sharing so that we can all have a chance to hear and learn from them. I haven't had many issues of people being like really boldly disrespectful of that. My students have been very respectful, and I've actually had them help me make those ground rules together as a class. We work collectively on those ground rules, and so if they have a stake and a say in how the class functions, they're often more willing to respect it because they're like, oh yeah, that was my idea and I should be following that. So let's see, more questions. How can we engage in this way of learning and teaching online when we cannot reshape the physical environment? Great question, Kaylee, and I thought that might come up for sure because of the online context that we find ourselves in now. There's definitely different ways that I've done this. So you can do it in discussion boards. So if you want to do it asynchronously, so you don't want to be live on video or on some kind of web conferencing platform, you can do it in discussions. And sometimes you can do it in a way that you just set out the rules. So you say each student has a chance to post something, and then the next student along the line can respond, or someone else has to respond to 2. You can do that, but then you can also set it up where you have a class list, and if you're synchronous, you're live with them, you can go down the list and say, okay, now it's so and so's turn to speak, and then when they're done, they can either type in like an arrow in the chat and say that they're passing off the feather, or they're passing off the virtual feather or object to the next person, and then you can have a list and a process for that, or you can just leave it more open and let them just pass it off to someone that they know that's in the space. And then if you're on the screen, you're live. Sometimes in Teams, you can get a sense of an order. If you see everyone's face up on the screen, you can go in like a direction that you find as a facilitator that looks circular. That's an approach that I've seen taken. Other ways is like, obviously there has to be a level of trust and safety established too. So one thing that I've thought of is like, how can you ensure the safety of students when there's emotional topics or hard topics, and how do you know if a student has been hurt, like a microaggression occurred online? It's not always, you can't always decipher that through text. So emojis are kind of overused, so they're not always an accurate depiction of how a student's feeling. So follow up with students is definitely important. If you see something that's questionable in the discussion that might have hurt someone or might have been taken the wrong way, to address that kind of separately with those students. But other ways is you could come up with like a safe word kind of with your students, where like if there's something that really hit them hard or they took it the wrong way or it hurt them, they could put that word in their thread, or they could notify you and you can go back into the thread and check it out and address it in any way that it needs to be addressed. So coming up with that word as a class is something that I would recommend you could do. Any other thoughts around like the how of it? I can go forward a little bit to the next question as well that I wanted to pose. So what are some common hesitations or fears about circle work from students and from instructors? And I think we addressed this a little bit about students that are resisting. But I'll tell you a funny story about my students, because the first time that I decided to use like a fully circular approach for the first hour of a 3-hour class, it was funny because I realized that like space becomes an issue, physical space on campus. I teach at St. Lawrence College. There's not very many spaces where the desks or the chairs aren't fixed. So you need an active learning space, and there are more and more spaces like that on campus, but they book up so fast. So I requested, like, I said, do I even need a classroom for one? It was a winter course, so I kind of did need a classroom in case the weather was bad. If it was summer or fall, I might have said, I don't need a classroom. But I realized I did need a classroom, so I said, is there a space that I can have where I can move the desks out of the way or anything like that? There wasn't a lot, so what I ended up doing was I asked, can we just book the aerobics studio then in the shack in the athletic center? And they thought, I think they thought, wait a minute, they actually said to me, we've never been asked that. Let us check and see if that's possible. So I was able to book the aerobics studio, which was really funny because when the students walked in, they had no clue what to expect. They were very nervous. They walked in like, do we need special shoes for this class? Is this like a dance class, or what are we going to be expected to do here? And you could see the fear written all over their faces. I felt bad a little bit, but I was laughing inside because I knew they were in for it, like a different way of knowing and learning. And I was so excited to share that with them and show them that it was a little scary, and it was scary for me too, because as an educator, I'd grown up sharing circles in ceremony in practice, but I've never had an opportunity to teach in that way. So I was actually very terrified too to run my first class with circles like that, because what it requires is a lot of vulnerability. It requires you to be open to whatever comes up in circle, and you can't prep for that. Like, how do you prep for that? You can't. So it's very unnerving for both yourself as the instructor and the students. But we worked on it together. I said, no, don't worry at all. Like, let's get to know each other, and we'll see that this space can be a safe space, but also a brave space where we can all share and try our hand at different things. So I modeled that. I was making sure that I was always very vulnerable and brave with my students too. In fact, I don't consider myself a soloist at all, but I sang some songs for them, and I was hoping they would join in, but they didn't. So I soloed a few songs with them and taught them some dances as well. So we did end up dancing. Like, their initial impressions were kind of right, but we built up to that. I did not do that the first few weeks. In fact, it was like the very last class or towards the end. But we had a lot of sharing, a lot of opportunity to just talk to each other, and it was really great. And I was very upfront with them, saying, like, I'm very open, and I'm not easily offended, and I hope that that's the way that we can approach this context in this course. It was a Foundations of Aboriginal Peoplehood course, and mainly non-Indigenous students took it. I think I had a handful or less of Indigenous students in the course both times I ran it, but I wanted them to feel comfortable asking and sharing in any way, and I wasn't going to be a stickler on terminology. If they said the wrong word, if they said Indian instead of Aboriginal or Indigenous, or if they said, often they would say Indigenous culture and make it almost like a pan-Indigenous identity, and I didn't get offended by that. I would just address it if I needed to in the circle, but often it would come up in the assignments, and that's the place where I would address it and say it's actually appropriate to say Indigenous cultures, because there's so many different nations, there's different communities, there's different contexts and understandings of those. So talking about diversity, and that came up in our lessons as well, but I wanted them to know that, like, there's no such thing as a silly question, and you ask what you need to ask, and the part that matters is that you're coming to it with a good heart and a good mind, and you're not doing it intentionally, but you're just trying to learn. So it was a very safe space for all of us to share and learn together in that way. You would have loved being in my class. That's great. We do have a lot of fun, and actually we got in trouble one time for being too noisy from another instructor in the next class over, because the students were overly excited because I brought in turkey wings and turkey tails, and we were making feathers, and we had to actually clean the feathers and things like that, and it was a very exciting new thing for them, and they were a little bit their volume was a little out of control, and I kept saying, you need to quiet down, like there's something going on in the next class. And then eventually that instructor came over, and she's like, do you mind quieting down over there? And I'm like, yeah, I'll try. They're really excited. I've been telling them that they need to keep their volume down. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. So Safe and brave spaces. Yeah. So part of bringing issues of colonization forward in the classroom would be very uncomfortable and feel very, very unsafe. You're right about that, Anastasia. I think that is the biggest challenge of doing this approach and taking on any topics that are sensitive or can cause harm and damage. Especially, I was concerned about like settler guilt or white guilt, and also harming Indigenous students in the class if things came out the wrong way when people were talking and speaking, missteps or stumbles along the way. And it was very much a good experience for me to learn a lot about myself as well, like how would I handle that if it came up. And often I didn't really know until in the moment, or I would have an intuition of how I should handle things. So I'll give an example of this. So one of the topics we did was residential schools, and I was showing a film, and it's called We Were Children, and it's very sensitive, it's very graphic, and it goes through and details the account of two children that were in residential schools. It shows everything that happened to them, like the abuse, the punishment for speaking their language, and just the attack on their character and their cultures. And it's very intense. It's intense for me to watch, and I knew that it would be emotional for me to watch in the classroom space with my students, because they would have their own reactions individually. I would have my own reaction, and then I'd have to get up at the front of the class or in a circle and speak about it too. And I didn't know how I would react for one or how they would. And unfortunately, also I taught in the winter, and that happened to be a snow day. The worst possible day to have a snow day is when you're showing a sensitive video in class like that, because you know the students are either going to watch it at home or like try to catch up on it. So I sent out a disclaimer and said, it was a disclaimer in the syllabus for sure, but then I sent a disclaimer that day saying, like, if you're watching this at home, please watch it with a classmate, watch it with a friend, watch it with someone where you can be safe to feel the way that you need to feel and not get too upset. And we will debrief and discuss in class if needed. And I pointed them to mental health supports too, in case it really hit them hard, because some people it hits extremely hard and they do need additional support that I could provide if they were in class. But if they're not, I didn't have a sense of how safe they felt or how they were handling it. But in class, for the few that came, I think that day maybe eight students showed up, and I showed up in the storm. And we watched it together. And at first, you could feel the tension, you could feel the emotion in our space. I sat there quietly. I think a few tears slid down my face. I was feeling their emotions around me. It was very heavy. But we felt okay together. We felt all right, but we didn't know how to talk afterwards. I took my time getting up and going to the front of the room, and I just addressed like the elephant in the room, that energy that we were all feeling. And I said, I'm not even sure yet what I want to say, so let's just give ourselves a few minutes to take this in, absorb what it means and how we're feeling, and then let's sit with it. I know that some of you are probably feeling this way as well. I could see some of them were visibly upset. So I said, let's just take some time, do some breaths. We would breathe together for a few moments, and then I started to speak and said, let's unpack this a little bit. Why are we feeling sad? Why are we feeling other feelings? So a lot of them said guilt and shame and just really deep sadness and anger that this had happened in Canada, and they had no idea that these schools existed and that Indigenous peoples went through that. So it was very challenging, but we made it through because we had built up that level of trust and that level of respect and understanding of each other, and that it was okay, that if tears came up in the classroom, we would all be okay and we'd be able to support each other. So it worked out, but it's very difficult, and it's a comfort level that you have to develop as an educator, and that you have to be able to know that you'll be okay to handle whatever comes out of things, and maybe thinking a little bit ahead about what might come up and how you might handle it. But like I said, you never truly know until the moment how people will react or respond. Okay, let's see, any more? Okay, so what context can circle work be used in, and how can I adopt this for my context or course? I'm sure many of you are thinking about this throughout the presentation, and ways that you might adapt and adopt this approach for your specific context. So I'm happy to take questions about how this might work in different contexts in the amount of time that we have left. We've got about 15 minutes remaining. So if there's any specific ones that I can address that you're okay to share, like with the group. If you'd rather take some time away to think about it and email me, you can do that as well, and we can have a consultation about it, your specific class. And then I can talk in general about the ways that I've seen circles function and work in different contexts. So if that's helpful, maybe I can start there. So I've done training actually in circle work. So there's different ways that you can do facilitate circles. Culturally, you often want to do it with a lot of care, a lot of love, a lot of kindness goes into that. And often you use and rely on the sacred medicine. So you would smudge the circle, smudge the space before you're asking people to bring all their energies into that space. Because as I said, if you don't approach things with a good mind, the circle quickly comes out of balance, and people's energies, if they're not in a good space, can cause harm and damage to other energies in the room. And things can quickly get out of hand, and you can't control it as a facilitator in the way that you should be able to if everyone's coming in at a good level. So it's important to take care and really understand, even if you're not trained with reading energies. I think as educators we can tell, like through body language, through the ways that our students are engaging and interacting, when it's maybe not a good day to do that, or you can start out and say, okay, let's switch to a different approach because maybe we're not in the right space right now to do a circle. I haven't had too many situations where that's come up. I've had some, but it's very rare that I haven't been able to run a circle when I've wanted to or felt that it was a good approach. Okay, we got a question that I can address right now. So is it okay to smudge if you're a settler instructor, or should you seek out and ask an Indigenous elder or knowledge keeper? I think definitely you would want to do it with someone that's knowledgeable in smudging, because it's funny because the medicines also have an energy, as I talked about how everything has a spirit or an energy. And if you're not confident or you don't have the knowledge of those medicines, things can happen. So I'll give an example. One time I was not very experienced with smudging yet, but I was tasked with going and sharing about smudging to a group of students that were outside of my context. I didn't know them. And it was also outside, so that's not advisable if it's windy. It was a windy day, and it was difficult smudging conditions anyway. But particularly one student in this group had a very bad energy, and I kind of knew, like I could sense it. And she's like, I don't know if I should smudge. And I was like, well, let's try and see how it goes. Well, that was a mistake, because immediately when I presented her with the smudge, which is supposed to be just smoke, it ignited and a big flame shot up out of the shell. And it was so hot that I actually had to drop the smudge shell. Like I had to drop it and then gather the stuff back up after the flame went out. And I've never had that happen since. But I should have known better than to smudge her when she was in that space. Like I didn't want to center her out or embarrass her, but that's often better to do, just to take that student aside and say, I don't think that you're at the right stage right now to do this, but let's talk about some things, or is there anything that I can help you with? Like not embarrassing them, but have that conversation with them and let them know that maybe they could try again another day or something like that. And I think too, like you just want to make sure that you have someone that has that knowledge, and you don't want to take that on yourself to smudge with students when you're not familiar with it, and you could really benefit by bringing an elder or a knowledge keeper into your classroom to share about the reasoning behind it, the sacredness of the medicines and what those mean and what they represent, because that's the meaning part of it is important too, not just the act or the ritual of it. Is it appropriate for settlers to run circles in traditional medicine, etc., when the content isn't specifically Indigenous? Yeah, so I always get the questions about appropriate versus appropriation, and I think that's valid for sure. What I say is my opinion, and people will differ in what advice they give you or what their opinions are on it. But my take and my understanding is that you wouldn't want to just run a circle in the way that an Indigenous person would run a circle. Like you wouldn't want to model that and take that on as your own, but you could position yourself as saying, this is a different approach that I'm taking. It's a new approach to me, and show that vulnerability to your students and position yourself. Say that I'm a settler. This is my background. This is not my framework and understanding or way of teaching and learning, but this is something new that I'm modeling and trying, and credit a source that you've been given. Like if you wanted to say, I learned this from a Mohawk elder, I learned this from, you could even say Lindsay, I guess, but wherever you learned it from, just really crediting that and giving and being careful about your energy and your spirit that you're bringing to it. I tell people it's a lot about intention. So I've entrusted people or gifted people. Actually, I've only gifted talking feathers to a few people that were non-Indigenous. And the reason that I gifted it to them was because I knew that their intentions for running a circle and for using it in that way were good ones, and that they would do it. They wouldn't do it until they were ready. And I actually gifted one feather to a fellow colleague of mine, and she didn't feel like she was in the right space of learning and knowledge about things to use that talking feather in her class until about a year or two later. So that shows me that she really took a lot of care and a lot of thought, and she took my message and my teachings and took it in the right spirit that I intended, the spirit of sharing, the spirit of honoring. So I think it's important, if you're coming from that place, then you can't really go wrong, in my view. But if you're not careful with the way that you frame that and frame yourself in that context, it can kind of cross or blur the lines between appropriate and appropriation. Okay, so Robin, you just had a comment. For me as a white settler, I'm very careful about what kind of Indigenous knowledges or practices I share with students, or anyone for that matter. I'm always careful to credit. Yeah, so that's exactly the right way, I would say, the good way to do it. Michael, so I think using circle work as an additional pedagogical tool with the acknowledgement that the practice is grounded in Indigenous decolonial pedagogy, but without a personal connection to Indigenous scholar, worry about attempting to over-borrow in its original context in the classroom. And so, yeah, if you're not comfortable doing a circle in that same sense, there's different ways that you can adopt it to make it more feasible for your context and understanding. You can take the circle approach. You don't have to do the same, like, turn taking, the same feeling. You can do it in different ways. So I mentioned that I've done different trainings. One was a justice framework, so restorative justice, using a sharing circle as a way to gather like victims, perpetrators, people affected all in one circle and dealing with that head on. There's a lot of prep work and almost like scripts that go along with that to help guide that process. So you can have a more structured circle, or you can have a very much more loosely structured circle. So you could have popcorn style, where you all stand in a circle, but you just pop around to different students who have questions to raise. So you could do it that way too. So there's different ways to adopt and adapt, and I'm happy to talk outside of this context about those, because we've only got a few minutes remaining. Yeah, I think medicines for sure. I would say stay away from any sacred objects, medicines that aren't from your own culture, not to use those without the guidance or having someone that's Indigenous and knowledgeable about those things come in and share with you. That's great. Yeah, Robin, you're right about circles being very many different contexts use circles. History, identity, pedagogical influences. Yep. Perfect. So there's only about 5 minutes remaining. So if there's any final thoughts or questions, I'm happy to hear them. And this chat remains after the fact. So if you type anything in there and I don't get to it now, I can revisit it later or reach out to you. I'll type my email into the chat so that you can have it if you have questions that arise afterwards. Because as I said, sometimes lessons take a little while to sink in. And if I hear from you in 2 years, I won't be offended. Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone. It's been absolutely a pleasure to share this space and time with you. And I love sharing about this topic, and anything that I can share and help with understanding. And just, it gives as much to me as it does to all of you to hear what your thoughts are and what questions you're grappling with. And it strengthens me as an educator and as a person. So I really appreciate the fact that you've all taken the time to come out. If you have to head out, that's perfect. If you are able to stick around for a bit, I can take a few more questions outside of the recording. And thanks to Sandra. I'm so happy that we're in the same space. Like, this is so cool. I'm so